Content warning. This episode covers large-scale financial fraud against disabled and grieving victims, jury tampering, a federal investigation, and ongoing litigation. Some details discussed are unresolved and may change as this case continues. Please take care while listening.
It's the morning of May 13th, 2026, and inside the South Carolina Supreme Court building in Columbia, 5 judges are about to release a unanimous opinion that will undo, in a single afternoon, the most watched murder verdict the state has produced in a generation. The opinion runs for pages before it gets to the sentence that matters. The Clerk of Court overseeing Alex Murdaugh's 2023 murder trial had, in the justice's own words, placed her fingers on the scales of justice. Her name is Becky Hill. She wasn't a juror, witness, or a lawyer in this case. She was the elected official responsible for administering the courtroom. And according to sworn juror testimony the Supreme Court found credible, she spent the trial telling jurors off the record not to be fooled by Alex Murdaugh's testimony, and pushed to remove a juror who seemed sympathetic to the defense before deliberations even started. 3 years after Alex Murdaugh was sentenced to 2 life terms, he was, legally speaking, back to square one on the murder charges. Everything else he pleaded guilty to, the theft, the millions of dollars, stayed exactly where it was.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Coffee and Crime with Mom. I'm Zaylee.
And I'm Nicole. Mom, if you're just joining us, go back and listen to part 1 first. We covered the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh, the boat crash that started unraveling everything, and the 2023 trial that convicted Alex Murdaugh. This episode picks up exactly where that one left off.
Right, because what we're about to walk through is genuinely one of the strangest turns we've ever covered on the show. A man who is legally guilty of stealing over $20 million, you guys. Currently serving decades in prison for it, no matter what happens next. Whose murder conviction just got thrown out because of what one courthouse employee did during the trial. Let's start with the money, because you need those numbers in your head before anything else in this episode will make sense.
Okay, so quick recap of where things stood by the end of 2024. Alex Murdaugh had been convicted of murdering Maggie and Paul in March of 2023 and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms separately, and this is the part that's easy to lose track of. He had also pleaded guilty across 2 different court systems to an enormous decade-spanning theft scheme against his own clients. Let's actually break down what that scheme cost people, because the number gets thrown around vaguely a lot, and it deserves specifics.
Yes, it does. So on November 17th of 2023, Alex Murdaugh pleaded guilty in South Carolina State Court to 22 charges, a negotiated sampling out of roughly 101 state financial charges that had piled up against him since his arrest. That's insane, 101 charges. The counts covered money laundering, breach of trust with fraudulent intent, obtaining property by false pretenses, forgery, computer crimes, and tax evasion, spanning 6 different low country counties. Lead prosecutor Crichton Waters said the theft totaled over $12 million, stolen from at least 18 separate victims over more than a decade. Judge Clifton Newman sentenced him to 27 years on the state charges with a mandatory minimum of 85%, meaning close to 23 years actually served, running concurrently with his murder sentences. Waters called it likely the longest sentence for white-collar crime in South Carolina history, and he deserved it.
Every bit of it.
All of it.
Yeah, but that was only half of it, because Alex Murdaugh hadn't just defrauded people through the state court system. He'd built a parallel scheme that violated federal banking and wire fraud law, and the federal government wanted its own conviction. On September 21st, 2023, Alex Murdaugh pleaded guilty to 22 separate federal counts: conspiracy to commit wire and bank fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. The Department of Justice laid out 3 distinct schemes. First, from 2011 to 2021, he conspired with a banker named Russell Lafitte to route client settlement checks through Palmetto State Bank, where Lafitte would distribute the money for Alex's personal use, loans, cash, expenses, instead of the clients it belonged to.
Second, starting around 2017 and intensifying through 2021, he funneled client settlement funds directly to himself, including through that fake company we mentioned in part one, Forge, created in 2015 specifically so he'd be the sole signer with no oversight. And third, from 2018 to 2020, he conspired with attorney Corey Fleming to defraud both the estate of his housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, and his own homeowners insurance carriers out of roughly $3.5 million.
Wow.
He, I don't get it. I just
It's a level
horrible,
of greed
horrible.
that I don't
Yeah,
think we can understand.
yeah. On April 1st, 2024, federal judge Richard Gurgel sentenced him to 40 years, 480 months, running concurrent with his state sentences. The judge ordered $8,762,731.88 in restitution to victims and a $10,034,377.95 forfeiture of ill-gotten gains, and noted the fraud had run for 15 years and touched 27 identified victims.
So here's the number of people should actually be sitting with. Somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million, taken from a disabled quadriplegic former client, an injured state trooper, his own law partners, and the family of a woman who cleaned his house for over 20 years and died falling down his own front steps. And here's the detail that matters more than almost anything else in this entire episode, because both of those convictions came from guilty pleas, not jury verdicts. Nothing that happens to the murder case can touch them. Alec Murdaugh is going to die in prison on the financial crimes alone, regardless of what happens with the murders, which makes what happens next even stranger, because a lot of people have asked, if he's never getting out anyway, why did this become a 5-alarm legal fire in 2026? Well, the answer is that this case was never really about whether Alec Murdaugh walks free. It's all about whether the system that convicted him of killing his own family did its job honestly. And it turns out it didn't.
No, because Becky Hill was the elected clerk of court for Colleton County during the 2023 murder trial, an administrative role, not a legal one, responsible for managing courthouse logistics, records, and the jury. According to South Carolina Supreme Court's written opinion released in full detail this past summer, multiple jurors testified that Hill made comments to them during the trial suggesting Alec Murdaugh's testimony shouldn't be trusted. Jurors described her calling his 2 days on the stand epic and telling them not to be fooled or thrown off by it, telling them specifically to watch his body language closely.
Wow. And
She was
she should know
way
better. That lady looked like she
yes,
seemed like she worked there forever.
yeah, she was way
You
out of
know
pocket.
better.
She
Yeah.
knew better. That was very intentional. And come to
Mm-hmm.
find out, so it allegedly might have been some beef between her and the Murdaugh family, and that's what all of
Mm.
this was for.
Wow.
A Barnwell County clerk who assisted during the trial went further, testifying that Hill had repeatedly talked about wanting to write a book about the case and said of a guilty verdict that it would sell more copies. What?
And then there's what happened to a juror named Myra Crosby, a juror who, by multiple accounts, seemed sympathetic to the defense. Crosby was removed from the jury before deliberations began, after Hill reportedly relayed concerns about her to the judge. The Supreme Court found that the information used to justify removing Crosby was misrepresented, and that removing her, a juror who might have hung the jury or pushed for acquittal, potentially changed the outcome of the entire trial. Online, this dismissal earned Crosby the nickname the egg juror, tied to an earlier explanation involving a comment about deviled eggs that got tangled up in the public account of why she was let go.
Yeah, and she was affected by that. Like, she needed therapy and all of that. She said it was
Yes.
horrible after, like, the things people were saying to her and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
The court's ruling was unanimous, 5-0. In their words, Becky Hill placed her fingers on the scales of justice, denying Alec Murdaugh his constitutional right to a fair trial by an impartial jury, and in a decision that surprised a lot of legal observers because courts are usually very reluctant to let convicted murderers use a technicality to escape a life sentence, that violation was serious enough on its own to throw out both murder convictions and order a completely new trial. Yeah,
Yeah.
she did too much.
And it's all on her. So, what happened to Hill herself? In December of 2025, she pleaded guilty to misconduct in office and perjury, specifically tied to showing sealed trial exhibits to an outside photographer and then lying about having done it. She was not charged with jury tampering directly, and she received no prison time. She has consistently denied that she improperly influenced the jury's actual verdict and has described her comments about sensing the jury would move fast as, in her words, women's intuition rather than deliberate manipulation.
If this was a colored woman of any of
Mm,
the colors,
any of
jail,
it.
jail, okay?
Yes.
Jail time, straight to jail because all of the things she did, she knew she shouldn't have been doing.
She knew she shouldn't have been doing
She
that.
knew she should not have been doing it. So I don't care. I don't understand. I don't know what their excuses are for excusing
Mhm.
her. But she had to have been obviously there for a while. So she was connected to the
Mhm.
people in power and they was like, yeah, you wrong for that, but we're gonna let you off. Because
Yeah.
ain't no way.
Yeah.
That distinction matters a lot to how people have reacted to this. If you believe Hill, this is a case of an overeager, book deal chasing clerk who talked too much and got unlucky timing on a wildly high profile case. Annoying, unethical, worth punishing, but not a conspiracy that changes what actually happened at Moselle. If you believe the juror's sworn testimony as the Supreme Court waited, this is a person who actively worked to remove a juror who might have voted differently and who spent a trial coaching the remaining jurors toward the verdict she wanted. The court sided with the second interpretation. Attorney General Alan Wilson's office notably
Mm.
reversed its own earlier position over the summer, filing a motion in July to unseal with privacy redactions the transcript behind Crosby's dismissal and the state investigation file on Hill, material that had previously stayed sealed. The crazy part is she did write a book and
That's
then went
crazy.
on tour and did all of these
So she don't care
crazy
about
things.
none of this. And
No.
she's so worried. She's talking about therapy and all of that. I'm sure that you did the wrong thing. You knew you were doing the wrong thing when you did it. Alec Murdaugh, for his part, filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against Becky Hill in May of 26, alleging her conduct violated his constitutional rights. Hill has moved to have that lawsuit dismissed. That litigation is still working its way through federal court as of this recording.
So here's where things actually are. As of late July 2026, newly assigned Judge Deborah McCaslin held a status conference on June 29th and set a tentative retrial date, April 5th, 2027. She said she intends to hold to that date, barring major delays. The defense, Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, the same attorneys from the original trial, has filed a motion to move the retrial outside the entire 14th Judicial Circuit, arguing the area is too small and too saturated with books, Becky's, documentaries, and years of coverage for an impartial jury to be seated there again. As of the most recent hearing, the state hasn't formally responded yet, and Judge McCaslin has asked both sides to try to agree on an alternate location themselves, telling them essentially that she'll pick one for them if they can't agree. There's no ruling yet. In the meantime, all pretrial hearings are happening in Lexington County by mutual agreement, regardless of where the actual retrial eventually lands.
But this case, it doesn't matter where you go. Everybody has heard of this. You moving it to a different county. I mean, it's a Netflix documentary. They have a dramatized show about it on Prime. Where
Yeah,
where are you going that people haven't
correct.
heard of this case? So the defense has also asked for independent DNA testing through a private lab called Othram. A previously undisclosed unknown male DNA found under Maggie Murdaugh's fingernails, evidence that was never fully explored at the original trial. And Attorney General Alan Wilson has said publicly that this time around, all our legal options are on the table, including the death penalty, a real reversal from the original prosecution made possible because South Carolina resumed executions in 2025 after a 13-year pause. Alec Murdaugh's attorneys have called that a politically motivated move tied to Wilson's campaign for governor and have said they'll fight it as vindictive prosecution if it's formally pursued. The next pretrial hearing is set for August 14, 2026. back in Lexington County, where both the venue decision and the DNA testing motion are expected to be addressed, assuming the state has filed its written response by the motion's deadline the week before.
One more strange footnote before we get to the theories. Curtis Edward, cousin Eddie Smith, the man Alec paid to shoot him in that failed insurance scheme back in 2021, which we went over all of that in part one. Okay. All of that has resurfaced publicly, including a recent documentary interview claiming Alec had actually asked him to kill him outright that day, not just wound him, specifically so he wouldn't be around to be responsible for the murders. It's an explosive claim from a man with obvious credibility problems of his own, but it's now part of the public record of how this story is being told, which is a lot because, I mean, regardless, you asked somebody to shoot you and then you didn't let's go somewhere and let's do all of this. You did this not far from where you stay. So
I don't understand what brain he was using to plan any of what he did. Considering his job and his family, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I don't think that he used
any
brain.
He took it out and it was at the cleaners that week.
Yeah. He lent it to someone else.
Yeah, they needed
It was on consignment.
He's such a nice guy. Okay, normally in the theories, we're weighing who actually did it. This case is unusual because the jury already answered that question, guilty, unanimously, in 3 hours. And then the court that reviewed it said the process used to reach that answer was broken. So the real question we're weighing here isn't just, did Alec Murdaugh do it? It's, does a broken process mean we don't actually know? Theory 1. Alec Murdaugh is guilty. The original jury got it right, despite Hill's misconduct, and the retrial will end the same way. This is the state's clear position. Attorney General Wilson has said he intends to retry aggressively, and the evidence that convicted Murdaugh the first time, the Snapchat video placing him at the kennels, the financial collapse as motive, his own admitted lies to investigators, doesn't disappear just because the jury process was flawed. Evidence for it, none of the physical or digital evidence from the first trial has been discredited. Only the jury process that evaluated it. Against it, we genuinely don't know how a truly untainted jury would have weighed that same evidence. And the defense has spent 5 years arguing there's no direct physical evidence tying him to the murders at all.
Theory 2. Hill's misconduct genuinely changed the outcome, and a fair jury might not have convicted him. Under this theory, removing Myra Crosby, a juror that defense believed was sympathetic to them, combined with Hill's off-the-record coaching of the remaining jurors, tipped a case that could have gone the other way, or at least hung. Evidence for it, the Supreme Court's own unanimous finding that this misconduct was serious enough to void the verdict entirely. Courts don't do that lightly. They really don't.
They don't.
And against it, even the Supreme Court's opinion about the process, not about innocence. They never ruled that Murdaugh didn't do it, only that the trial that said he did wasn't conducted fairly. And to that point, that is true. That is true.
Sure.
Becky was way out of line. I don't necessarily feel like he would have had a hung trial. I still feel like he would have been convicted because it was too much. That was
too much.
Yeah. But
she still did the wrong thing, and we don't know how much what she said affected those jurors.
Right.
So we have theory 3. This was never really about proving Alec Murdaugh's guilt or innocence. It was about protecting the integrity of the system, and everything else is secondary. Courts overturn convictions on process grounds all the time for people who almost everyone agrees are guilty, because the alternative, letting misconduct slide because we're confident about the outcome, is worse for the system in the long run. Evidence for it, this is literally what the Supreme Court's opinion says it's doing. Against it, for the victims' families and for the public, the system worked correctly this time. Is a genuinely hollow answer when it means reliving a trial for a crime everyone already sat through once.
Where do you land on this though, Mom? Because I mean, it's already a lot.
Crazy. So honestly, I think both things can be true. And I think that's the uncomfortable answer. I think Alec Murdaugh very likely did this. The financial collapse, the timing, his own admitted deceptions, none of that adds up to coincidence for me. But I also can't get past the fact that a courthouse employee actively worked to remove a juror. Just that by itself, if she didn't say anything to anybody else, that by itself is enough. You did too much.
You already did way too much.
And then she coached the rest toward a verdict. That's not a small technicality. If we let that slide just because we're confident in the outcome, we're saying the process doesn't actually matter as long as we like the ending. And that's a genuinely dangerous standard to set for this case and every case after it.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I'll add one more thing though. What strikes me most is that none of this changes what he already confessed to, because he confessed to all of the financial crimes, the $20 million from people who trusted him, including Gloria Satterfield, she worked for him for 20 years in his home every day and was like a mother to
Rape
his
his
son.
kids. Yeah.
Yes. Whatever a jury decides about the murders in 2027, that part of the story is already permanently, irreversibly settled by his own guilty plea, in his own words. Alec Murdaugh will spend the rest of his life in prison regardless of the murder retrial's outcome, which he should, because he did horrible shit.
It's just
Because
so much that he did.
yeah, all of the financial crimes. He was charged 27 years state and 40 years federal. So that's 67 years in prison. He's not going to get out of there alive.
Right, right. Okay, so before we wrap this two-parter, I just want to talk about it for a second, human to human, because this is one of those cases where every time I think I've landed somewhere, a new detail moves the ground under me.
Same. Honestly, one of the things that's sticking with me the most about what he's done, why I feel like regardless, this is some horrible shit, is the whole Gloria Satterfield situation. They tried to cover it up. It obviously was something that happened in the documentaries. You have one of the people who worked there tell you how unusual this situation was. And then if you go back and look into it, all the bodies surrounding the family, that's just then I mean that's horrible. He did this to somebody that was working 20 years for him. Like we said, that was like a mother to his kid. And then she just dies in your home and you take her money. Like I can't shake that.
Yeah,
I
no,
can't
right,
prove she was murdered, but allegedly she was murdered in your house and you covered it
right.
up.
And whatever, you scammed her son. So
Yeah.
because that part isn't in dispute. That's not alleged.
No.
That's confessed under oath in two courtrooms. And I mean, that really tells you so much about who this man actually is, independent of whatever a jury decides about, whatever they decide on June 7th.
Right. And I think that's exactly why this case keeps pulling people back in, even years later. You don't need to have a firm opinion on the murder retrial to be genuinely disturbed by the man underneath all of this, because both things can occupy the same person.
That's right. And I keep thinking about Buster too. He's the surviving son who lost his mother and brother in one night and then had to watch his father admit to 2 decades of lies on a witness stand. There's no version of this story where that family gets an easy ending.
No, that's
Whatever happens in
horrible.
2027, that's just
Yeah.
horrible.
So if you've already picked a side on the murders, and honestly, most people have, I get it. But hold it a little loosely until we see what a fair jury in a fair venue with a full DNA workup actually decides. That's genuinely all any of us can ask for at this point.
Right, right. So that's where this one stands. 5 years after a 911 call from a dog kennel and 3 years after a 3-hour jury verdict. Not closed, not resolved, and improbably still very much in motion. A man who has confessed to stealing from many of his clients, from the family of the woman who cleaned his house for 2 decades, currently appealing his way toward a second chance to be tried for killing his own wife and son.
That's just a crazy sentence in itself.
It is. We'll be following this case as the venue decision, the DNA results, and the retrial itself move forward through 2027. And if there's a real update, we will absolutely come back to it. Thank you for sticking with us through both parts of this one, co-conspirators.
This two-parter moved you. Please leave us a review, share it with someone who can sit with a story that doesn't have a clean ending yet, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the retrial actually starts. Tell us where you land, guilty again or something else entirely. Tag us or drop it in the comments.
Send us your cases and send us your read on this one. We read everything. We'll be back soon. Until next time. Bye.